Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see lots of folks trickling in. We'll give everyone one more minute and then we will get started. All right, great. Well, like I said, welcome everyone to a very exciting Insights Exchange, all about our MCURC research pipeline. You're going to gain a sense of what we've been up to recently in the research working group and a preview of what's ahead. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophie Egan. I am co-director of the Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. We are delighted to present these quarterly Insights Exchanges really as a forum for peer learning, hearing from all of our different working groups, committees, and strategic initiatives. This is the second installment, so be sure to check out, if you haven't already, our first one of the year focused on accelerating climate action. And, you know, above all, we are a research collaborative, right? And so we really want to ensure that all of you see research as the touchstone of what we're all about. And sometimes it's just helpful to hear the amazing extent of what our research working group is up to. I don't want to take up too much time, but just know that you are in for some really juicy insights. So the agenda for today, next slide please, is first for Dr. Peggy Policastro, the chair of our MCURC research working group, to describe the research pipeline. A really excellent snapshot, and will help you wrap your mind around what it is that's in there. Also recap published studies from the past year. Ghislaine Chalamel, our research program manager, will talk about two very exciting current and upcoming studies. And then Dr. Nell Putnam-Farr will speak about a study that is just getting off the ground, our Food for Climate labeling study, and then top takeaways from our most recent published paper, which is really what I wanted to kick off, is just a huge thank you and recognition. For those of you who don't know, we did announce this in the newsletter, but wanted to take a moment and celebrate a major milestone for the collaborative. So we had the publication of our fourth multi-site research study in a major peer-reviewed journal. So what I'm going to ask you all to do is actually, in a moment, go off mute, and we're going to do a big round of applause for all the people who made this possible. So this is co-authors, Peggy and Ghislaine, of course, for their leadership, moral support, and coordination. Dr. Nell Putnam-Farr for her expertise and contributions as lead author. Our co-founders, Dr. Shirley Everett and Greg Drescher, for their unwavering support of MCURC. And speaking of those co-authors, it's Tiffany Yapanich, Dr. Jean-Xavier Pinard, Dr. Ned Spang, Ghislaine, as I mentioned, Dr. Robert Valgenti, Danielle Sinclair, and Samantha Lubeau. I'm going to hear all about the details of this, but just for a moment, please join me in a big round of applause. I wondered if we'd actually be able to hear it. So thank you for that. And then I also wanted to take a moment and recognize one of our most valued MCURC members, somebody who works tirelessly behind the scenes, and that is our community manager, Shannon Muntz. So for those of you who have ever been onboarded or just learned the ins and outs of MCURC, I really wanted to just take a moment to recognize Shannon. She is behind our gorgeous Insights-packed newsletter, which I wanted to also briefly plug. And she just does so much, liaising with members for all types of questions and really ensuring that everyone feels equipped to hit the ground running in the collaborative. So again, big round of applause as if we're all together, hailing Shannon Muntz, our fabulous community manager. You're here, and you can chat you can applause in the chat as well, if you prefer. So thank you for indulging me in that. Speaking of the newsletter, I did want to just encourage you. We now, for those of you who don't know, we have made the LinkedIn account actually public, excuse me. And we are sharing the newsletter in there, the news brief each month, and really encourage you to invite colleagues, friends outside of the MCURC to subscribe. Shannon, if you can drop the link into the chat, or I can do that really quickly. this is full of great information, right? And we want to be able to share this with folks outside of the MCRC and inspire their work as well. And that's really all I've got for today. So with that, I'm delighted to turn it over to Dr. Peggy Policastro. Take it away.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you very much. Elaine, next slide, please. Okay, so I am Dr. Peggy Policastro. I am from Rutgers University, for those that may not know me. And what I'd like to do today is to talk about our research working group, our program, some of the studies that are completed, some that are in our pipeline, to give you a little bit better idea about how we democratize research, and just to welcome you to join in any research projects that we have as well. This past year has been very productive for the research working group. COVID did not slow us down at all. So right now we have around 78 members, with 67% being faculty or academics and around 33% being operators. And what you can see from this slide is our members in the research working group are very well represented across disciplines and across expertise. We have everything from medicine to nutrition, biochemistry, chemistry, etc. But we also have operators. We have our culinary folks, we have our dining services directors, and this is what makes us so unique and so different from the other type of working groups involving research that I've been a part of or that we see in other types of collaboratives. Next slide. So what's really different about this research working group is that, one, we have academic members who bring their scientific expertise. We also have research collaborators that have specific subject matter expertise. But this third piece here is so important and so different, and this includes our operators. Many times when people are studying foods, food systems, anything involving menus, the academics and the research collaborators will come up with different hypotheses or questions. However, they often don't include operators, and those are the boots on the ground, because those are the people that truly can tell us if a research study will work and if it's even feasible or if they want the results. Because what good is a research project if it just lays on a shelf, published in a manuscript, but if it's not going to be translated into operational use, it does no good. So therefore, what's great about MCURC is that we have those three components: academic faculty members, research collaborators, and our operators all working together to give you the best research projects that we can come up with to change the needle towards more sustainable and healthy diets for our students. Next slide. Okay, so what we try to do with MCURC research is shift diets. And the first thing we want to do is to develop research outcomes and methodologies based on some of our scaled initiatives. So next slide, please. Then what we want to do is to apply these solutions, to focus on practical guidelines and teamwork to ensure that they're feasible in our operation. So it's one thing to come up with an idea, but next to make sure that it's actually a feasible if we apply that solution. Next. Our main goal, again, is to keep in sight that our end game is always to deliver not only research, but the impact on students' actual diets. Again, if we just do research and that manuscript sits on a shelf, we're really not doing our due diligence in making sure that we achieve our objective of improving our students' diets. Next slide. And of course, delicious foods. The number one reason people taste things is because they taste good. And within MCURC, we're always looking onto how we can not only scale, apply our solutions, promote healthy and sustainability, but also making our food as delicious as possible so our students want to try these fabulous foods that we know are healthy for them. Next slide. So the way that we do this is we go about it in different types of projects. Our first project is a collective impact project. Now, many of you who are working in the dining arena will receive emails from Jackie Bartolo saying, we need information on what you're purchasing. And this is because we want to see our collective impact, and if we're moving the needle and moving towards more plant-based foods. We want to develop a culture of sharing data, not only in purchasing, but also in any type of projects that we're doing. And again, this is what makes MCURC so unique. Next, we have something called operational research. Now, this operational research isn't intended to be published, but more along the lines of looking how we can improve operations through, again, collective information that we, or data that we gather for the overall improvement of the dining experience and dining operations. And lastly, that academic research. This is where we develop an academic research portfolio. We're going to talk about that in a little while, develop a research design, and come up with a manuscript that details what we have found from our research. So again, collective impact projects, operational research, and academic research, all equally important in the research working group. Next slide. Great. So I just want to explain a little bit of the difference between academic and operational research. So with academic research, what you're going to have is research that's designed to contribute to the scientific knowledge, in the community, shared with the academic community. We're also going to investigate and writing upon the idea of scientific inquiry and methods. And in operational research, we're going to look at the program and process evaluation specifically for improving dining operations and dining services. It's not experimental. We don't have to do an IRB for this one, but we aim to test new ideas and to look among the different institutions and participating members within MCURC to generate insights. These insights are usually obtained pretty quickly, and we look for how we can expand this to other types of institutions across our membership. Another difference between the two is that in academic research, data is collected that extends beyond the scope of the activity and is analyzed. We do this through specific statistical analysis or thematically through qualitative types of research, and the results are intended to be published. They're intended to be published in a peer-reviewed or academic journal, where with our operational research, our insights are intended to enhance and to inform our other university dining programs. And the results are intended to be in operational toolkits, educational toolkits, guidelines, or trainings that, again, can be expanded among our member institutions. Next slide. So the research agenda. As you all know, if you're involved in the research working group, we use our campus dining halls as living laboratories. During COVID, it became a little bit more difficult since we didn't have the access to students that were staying around in our dining halls for a long period of time. But what we do is we use access to eating establishments to measure the impact and the implementation of all of our MOC principles. We look at student food choices, the climate, sustainability of dining operations. And those are the three drivers to why we do what we do. Next information. Good. So what I want to talk about right now are some of the research agenda items that we're looking to study currently and in the near future. So first, plant-forward diets. This is a big buzzword right now. Everything is plant-forward, plant-forward. And what we want to do is we want to transform protein menu concepts. What that means is we often think of the protein as being the center of the plate. What we want to do is flip that and have more plant-centered items being, quote, the center of the plate, and protein as a supporting role, using flavor, but not quantity of protein. Next slide. We want to reduce food waste. We want to effectively reduce, reuse, and recycle any overproduction of food. So we're looking at different ways that we can do this, and we'll talk about some of the studies that we did in studying this very shortly. Next. We also want to look at reducing portion sizes. Once again, emphasizing quality over quantity. We want to rethink that whole food experience. Are we enjoying our food because there's a lot of it? Or can we enjoy the same food with less portions, but a really tasty item? Next slide. We're interested in carbohydrate quality. We are looking to decrease the amount of processed foods, but improve the quality of the carbohydrates that our students are eating. We want to emphasize whole grains, legumes, while de-emphasizing minimally processed foods. Next. Healthy hydration. We all know that sugar sweetened beverages contain empty calories, and empty calories over a period of time can lead to poor nutrition and also to weight gain. So we're really trying to drive home that MOC principle of choose less sugar sweetened beverages. And we want to study this. How can we drive home that message to our students, not only with sodas, but any sugar sweetened beverages to include lemonade, iced tea, and even some of the proposed athletic drinks. And lastly, one that's near and dear to my heart is behavioral change, using nudges or influences of food choices that are healthier and more sustainable. So what we want to do is nudge people in the right direction so the healthy and sustainable choice becomes the more salient choice. That way we drive those foods versus foods with less nutritional or less sustainability. Next. So what I talk about now, research model. And we've been using this model for 4 different studies that are published right now, and we think it works out pretty well. We usually start in one institution. And in this institution, we will pilot an idea for a study. So the purpose of this pilot is more about the process, and we do process evaluation versus really looking or doing a deep dive into the data that we collect. This is really about seeing how the study runs. So with this type of pilot, it's usually started in one institution, and it could be run for a few days, up to a dozen days. We may get hundreds of data points. However, we're very limited in the number of variables that we can study. And again, we use the results of this in our pilot to then inform us for how we can scale this up to include in multiple universities. Next portion. So we go from one university to replicating this, to replicating this in multiple MCURC multi-site studies. And I think this is the beauty of the 4 studies that have been published so far under the MCURC umbrella. They all involved multi-sites. And I think that's very attractive because if you can replicate the results in more than one location, you're saying those results are pretty valid. So I think that our model works very well, not only because we involve more people and more institutions, but I also think it gives more validity to our overall program. So we go from one institution to we can do it up to 60 institutions if we buy in. Instead of just a dozen days, hundreds of days we're looking at. Instead of hundreds of data points, we have thousands of data points, and now we can really extend the number of variables we're looking at as well. So once again, this is really what makes MCURC unique, our ability to take one idea, flesh it out in one university, evaluate the process or implementation science, we sometimes call it, then expand it to multiple universities. Not only do we have that chance to make sure that our whole methods are going well, we also can show that we can replicate the results across multiple institutions. Next slide. So this now is our MCURC research pipeline. I mentioned at the beginning, we've been very productive, even though some of our dining halls may be closed or on limited capacity or in totally takeout mode. But this is what we have going on. I want to point out first some of the ones that we have going on right now, and this will be released at was released at our 2020 annual meeting, the resilience of the university food systems. Next, food choices and waste in university dining halls. This actually published in the journal Foods. Our National College and University Food Waste Study, and this manuscript is under development. And from there, we are working on olive oil, sauces, and plant-forward kitchen. Now, the first study was an operational study, as I mentioned before, so we'll present these results at our meeting, but not intentional to have published. However, the next two that are there have been published or under publication right now. Our third study, which is really interesting to me, Rutgers is involved in this as well, and we're working closely with the Culinary Institute in that we are replacing some fats or less healthy fats in different sauces with olive oil. And then we're starting with having these evaluated by different institutions, the chefs in the different institutions, and then later rolling this out to our students. This is an ongoing project right now. We're also doing a project on protein literacy with Data Central. For those of you who have gone to the annual meeting over the years, you all know that Kathleen presents fabulous information in the Data Essential report. And what we want to do was take this a little bit deeper. We talk about vegetarian in there, we talk about different preferences of our students, but we want to do a deeper dive. What do our students really know about different diets? Do they know the difference between a flexitarian versus a lacto-ovo-vegetarian? And can we move people through the different diets? Can we take someone who is totally a meat eater and then move them to maybe the next level to be more of a plant-based eater? Maybe not going directly from having animal to having no animal protein at all, but somewhere in the middle. So what we did is we developed different survey questions and then presented this to Data Essential to see if now they can include these questions when they send the survey out. So we'll get to see how much of the survey questions will be reported on in our October meeting. And the last study, which Nell is going to really talk about more later, another one that is dear to my heart, food climate menu labeling study. And what we're doing for this is to look at the impact of eco-friendly labels, again, to see if you can drive the needle to more eco-friendly foods versus more animal-based foods, which have a higher carbon footprint. But I'm going to let Nell talk about that in a little bit. Next slide. Studies published in the last 12 months. Sophie mentioned 4 studies that we have published. However, the first one was our dish study that was published, I think, 2 years ago, but only in the last 12 months, 1 year, 3 studies. That's amazing. This just really speaks to how much work we're all doing in the Menus to Change University Research Collaborative. And what I love about these studies, besides the fact that they're published, is that some of the authors on this study are dining directors. How often do you see a dining director or a chef listed as an author? It warms my heart to know that we're really democratizing all the research that we do. So our 3 research projects this year were our Faith in Fat, multi-study examination of university students, perceptions of fat in the diet, and this was published in Nutrients. The impact of a scalable multi-campus footprint seminar on college students' dietary intake and dietary carbon footprint, also published in Nutrients. And our third one was food choice and waste in University and Dining Commons, a Menus of Change University Research Collaborative study published in the journal Foods. And if you want to see any of these studies, these are all found on our Google files as well. Next. I just want to take a minute now to just acknowledge all the universities and collaborators that were involved in these different studies. So the Faith in Fat study, I am happy to say, Rutgers was the home institution for the pilot study, but I was so fortunate to be joined by 7 other institutions who were involved in this study as well, including Stanford, North Carolina, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Lebanon Valley, University North Texas, and UC Davis. So thanks to everyone who was involved in those studies. For the second study, Impact of a Scalable Multi-Campus Footprint, this was UCLA, Stanford, University of California, Davis as well. So thank you to all those researchers. And for the food choice and waste in University Dining Commons, a Menus of Change Research Collaborative study, Nell took the lead on this one at Rice. Thank you. Also involved was Stanford University, University of UC Davis, Lebanon Valley, University of California, Berkeley, and UC Santa Barbara. So you can see we really do have a collaborative, many different universities involved. If you haven't been involved already, please come to our meetings. We have monthly meetings for the research working group, and get involved. If you have no research experience, we still want to hear from you. We want you to be involved and be part of these studies. So I'm going to turn it over now to Elaine to continue on.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Under your leadership and thanks to the amazing work of our research working group members, we were able not only to adapt our research agenda to the ever-changing environment we had last year, but also to develop new and innovative research projects we are going to talk about. But before, I would like to talk about these 3 last slides. On them, you were able to see the amount of people who participated in our projects. You can see faculty, operators, and students, as Peggy mentioned, and the diversity of roles we were able to work with. This is why we named this Insight Exchange the power of the collective, because without all these people and without the support and guidance of Dr. Everett, Greg Drasher, Sophie, and Eric, we would not be able to achieve our vision, which is to cultivate the long-term well-being of all people and the planet, one student, one meal at a time. Last year, at about the same time, we had the first discussion about the impact of the pandemic on our university's food systems. The rapid, unforeseeable changes we were going through were disrupting our research agenda, but also giving us new and very important topics to discuss. How were we adapting through these changes? Mei Wang, and professor at the Department of Community Health Sciences at UCLA, and Christopher Bosso, professor of public policy and associate director at the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University, took the lead to develop a survey that would help us understand the resilience of the university food system. We sent this survey to 41 dining directors, among which 23 responded from 20 universities. And at that time, that was really a great milestone. The survey covered the context they were in, the immediate response to campus closure, the impacts of safety measures on their operations and their opening plans and lessons learned. So I will go very fast because we shared the results of this survey during a previous Insight Exchange last summer. But as you can imagine, this impact was huge. Very few dimensions of our dining operations were untouched by the pandemic. The implementation of safety measures in the dining halls, for those which remained open, came with single-use gloves, prepackaged food, single-use silverware, and single-use containers. That meant, for respondents, a major impact on their sustainability goals. We are going to have a lot more waste. We'll spend more than 50%, we'll spend more than 50% more on disposable. We eliminated carryout from our dining halls 4 years ago, which greatly improved our sustainability footprint. COVID-19 changes will wipe out most of those gains. We are needing to pause our sustainability focus. We are going to use single-use containers and silverware. Sustainability options with local products will be reduced due to takeout programming. Waste stream is impacted by addition of massive amount of takeout containers. And now, almost a year from it, we want to know what is happening. We will send out a new survey to all 47 dining directors, and we would like to have it completed by mid-May. The new survey will cover the impact of COVID-19 on sustainability goals, on the implementing of COVID regulations, but we want also to include initiatives addressing food insecurity and racial equity. It will also include, of course, reopening plans for fall and lessons learned from the past year. So we know you are as excited to participate as we are to read your answers, so keep calm and check your emails. It will be soon in your mailboxes. The second research project I'd like to share with you is the olive oil and the plant forward kitchen. This is our first sponsored operational research project in partnership with the Culinary Institute of America and sponsored by the International Olive Oil Council. This research project is gathering more universities than ever before, with 16 participating institutions. The goal of the project is to identify, among the huge variety of sauces in the Mediterranean diet, which have the best potential to accompany plant-based and plant-forward dishes. It is composed of two phases. The first one is an educational phase where participating chefs learned about the origin, production, and usage of olive oil in the Mediterranean diet. They tested different qualities of extra virgin olive oils and were asked what usage they could envision with these olive oils. And here is some feedback that we received on this first part of the training. This seminar was very enlightening, and for the first time I was able to actually identify many of the flavors in the olive oils. Great presentation gave my team a better perspective on how the complexity of olive oil can change as the profile changes. A great educational exercise, and all of my team members appreciated it. I'll try to cover in a nutshell what we learned, and hope you won't hesitate to go back to that presentation to deepen your understanding. From a chemical standpoint, the different qualities of olive oil are based on its free acidity. Extra virgin is low acidity, and the acidity goes up as the quality of olive oil decreases. The alteration of olive oil can be due to a low quality of the fruits, of the extraction process, or during the storage. What interested us most was the sensory analysis part, as you can imagine, and how we can evaluate the quality of olive oil through its taste, because not everyone is able to measure acidity. So based on the presence of sensory defects and the intensity of fruitiness, the sensory evaluation can identify the previous 4 qualities of olive oil. Extra virgin, for example, has no defect and a lot of fruitiness. And then as you go down, the presence of defect goes up. Oops, that was unexpected. The phase 2 of the project in which we are right now is the sauce selection, making and tasting. Chefs has to choose between 65 different Mediterranean sauces selected by the CIA, and kudos to Chef Tony and her team, because you can see all the recipes that they had to put together for this project. That was done in March, and right now, we already have 8 universities that have been through the sauce making and tasting process, with 27 chefs who answered the 78 question survey. The survey asked their feedback on the recipes and also potential dining applications. These data will be analyzed and gathered in a final report that we hope to present to you in October during the MCURC annual meeting. And now, we are going to talk about a third research project, an academic one, and sorry for the mistake in the pipeline because it is an academic research project. The Food for Climate Labeling Study, spearheaded by Nell Putnam-Fuar, Assistant Professor of Marketing at Rice University. This is also a very popular topic in the research working group, as we have currently 9 participating universities and potentially a 10th, and this research is done in partnership with the Food for Climate League and the World Resources Institute. This work is hugely inspired by a work done at UCLA by Hannah Mallon and Carol Bartolotto, and I saw Carol, so thank you, Carol, for all your support on this project. We used their criteria to identify a climate-friendly dish, and as you can see, it is a very simple way that doesn't require to calculate the carbon footprint of dishes. And therefore, it is appropriate for operational use, which is, as Peggy emphasized, very, very important for us. Based on this work and under Nell's leadership, we are currently working on the protocol. And Nell, I'll let you explain it to our audience.
All right, thank you, Guylaine. So I've met many of you, but before I begin, I'll mention that I sit in a business school and I sit specifically in a marketing department. And so what you'll see from me and my focus really tends to be around messaging and other marketing tactics rather than around sort of food service and preparation. And despite what you may think and what I was told when I took a public health class, just because I sit in a marketing department does not make me evil. And I love the fact that MCURC allows me to work on these projects that think about how to harness the power of marketing for positive change. So we know that drawing people's attention to something, making it salient, can be a positive. It gets their attention, it makes them likely to pay attention to it, perhaps more likely to choose it. And so the question that we're looking at here is really whether drawing their attention to the climate friendliness of the dish makes them more likely to choose it. So before we get into the questions of taste or actual satisfaction with the food, the first question really needs to be one of understanding how people perceive these types of labels. And to do that, we have to understand how they interpret the labels. So next slide, I think, yeah. So we know that people choose primarily on taste. And we know that they form impressions of taste based on descriptions of the item. So one of the challenges with labeling dishes is that people have these preconceived notions about certain types of food. I can call Brussels sprouts anything I want, but people are still going to have a very strong idea about whether or not they like them. And we've seen that labeling things as vegan or vegetarian strongly impacts whether or not people think they will choose the item because the label affects their expected satiation. We don't know as much about these climate-friendly labels. We've seen some work suggesting that climate-friendly might increase their intention to select climate-friendly foods. And this makes sense given the number of people, especially on college campuses, who think that this is an important issue. So the challenge that we have here is, one, intentions don't always translate through to actual behaviors. And two, is that we don't know what labels will be most effective because we don't know what associations people might have with that climate-friendly label. And so our goal here is to understand that. So the goal of this preliminary research is really to understand that piece that I was just talking about. Before jumping into a logistically challenging experiment involving multiple operators across multiple campuses, we want to first do some work to determine how people feel about these labels. So we're planning to pre-test a variety of different icons and labels to see what drives intentions, but also what expectations people form about the dish based on the presence of the icon. And just like research showing that many people believe healthy food to be less tasty, we want to understand if climate-friendly labels have any impact on expectations for taste and satiation for these dishes. So we also care, let's first start by looking at the icons that we're considering. So if you look at what we have here, this first icon on the left combines two colors, which may get more attention compared to the second icon. The third one on the right swaps out feet for intending to signal carbon footprint instead of a planet. I confess to being curious about this third one. On the one hand, I don't expect feet to go well with food, but it does get a little more attention. And so perhaps that causes people to read it more carefully, to think about it a little more. And part of what our goal is here is to actually get their attention with this icon. That we are trying to make these climate goals more salient at the moment of choice. We aren't going to move the needle for people who don't care about the planet or people who despise tofu, but we're trying to convince those people in the middle who care about the planet and might be willing to make different choices if you remind them of that. So next slide. We also care about the language. So this one on the left is the same message from the previous slide, emphasizing taste and the planet, and the others are variations on that. So we're sticking with the planet on these, but looking at how the language affects people's decisions. As a note, these will be fairly small, and so there's a good chance that people won't pay as much attention to the actual words. So that's something that we're dealing with and thinking about. And so in some ways, what we're doing is testing the presence of certain key words in people, whether that gets their attention, whether that changes. So the first one emphasizes taste a little bit more. The second one is climate. The third and fourth both talk about carbon footprint. And so the question is, what words really get people's attention? What words make certain goals salient to them in this process? The other difference between the last two messages on here is really about whether it's suggestive or directive. So choose more food versus by choosing this dish. So it's just a slight variation in the language for people. And so we're just looking to see what effect these words have on people's expectations, satiation, things like that. Do I think, carbon footprint doesn't taste very good, perhaps, things like that. So that's part of what we're trying to figure out here. So finally, once we've done all that and we've figured out which message seems to resonate the most with people online, that's when we look to test these in real life. Based on what we learned from the pretest, and it's possible it's multiple pretests depending on how this information comes in, we want to test one message across all the participating sites with a goal of choosing comparable dishes across the different locations. It's also important to note that we recognize there may be differences in the dishes chosen, and that's one of the things we're trying to learn. So coming back to the point I made at the beginning, it might not matter for something like Brussels sprouts, and we might struggle to get people to choose a vegan stir fry over a hamburger. So as we begin to test this in the real world, one of the things that's going to matter is making sure that we're very deliberate in our choices of what dishes we want to test. And eventually our goal is to understand not just what dishes they're willing to take, but how they feel about those choices. Are they satisfied with the actual dish? Do they feel better? Is there a warm glow associated with having chosen a climate-friendly dish? These are all the things that we're trying to learn over the course of this process. Because, as should be the case with good research, we don't actually know the answers yet. And so that's one of the things that makes this really interesting and exciting is this is new territory for us. I think there's a lot that we can learn here. And it's nice because it does combine the academic with the operational to really tell us things that hopefully can be useful for everyone in this process. So switching gears a little bit, I'm also going to talk to you about the project that was recently published. And so that, you'll note here that the title of this project really emphasizes the collaborative aspect of it, that it was something that was done across multiple different schools. We've talked about this project in a couple of different contexts before, so I'm going to emphasize two pieces of it. One is this collaborative aspect, which is a great example of bringing together all the partners, and then the publication and sort of how we're talking about it now going forward. So for those who don't know, the background on this is it was done in the dining halls to try and understand the choices that lead people to waste food. So we're not asking them about food waste directly because that question might influence their behavior. Nobody wants to waste food, and so they won't admit to things if you ask them about that directly. So instead what we did is ask them about how they choose the food that was on the plate and what led them to consume or not consume that food. We did this with QR codes and tiny URLs in the dining halls and asked them to complete the survey on their phones during the meal. So this was a nice way of also testing a new protocol that we hadn't really done before. Each location decided what posters to put up and how to incentivize their surveys. So it could be customized a little bit for each location, but the questions were the same across all the locations. And in terms of the actual survey itself, we asked them to take a picture of what they had chosen, then to tell us a little bit about what and why they had chosen, including how they chose the serving size. Then to take another picture once they were done and tell us a little bit about why they hadn't wanted to finish the things that were left on the plate. So we tried to keep these latter questions very non-judgmental, focusing on things like satisfaction and other attributes of preparation that might have led them to not finish what they chose. So going into this, we had a few hypotheses, but I do want to emphasize that this was really exploratory research, not confirmatory. It was not an experiment, but was really designed to gather background information that might help us design better interventions in the future. So our list of hypotheses was pretty basic and driven by what we know about people's behavior. I'll go slightly out of order here and present from the most to least intuitive, perhaps. So starting with the middle one, there's a logical belief that people waste food because they misestimate their hunger relative to the amount of food that they've taken. And there is some support for that. Not hungry was the second most popular reason for leaving food. And they did waste less when someone else chose the portion size, presumably because of all the good work that dining services have gone to in terms of right-sizing portions for people. But they didn't necessarily choose more when they chose based on hunger. So this wasn't necessarily a misestimation process so much as it was sort of being unsure about hunger or sort of having extra on their plate. So moving up to the top row, we did find that people wasted less food when they were familiar with the item. either because they'd eaten it before or because they were confident they would like it for other reasons. And we found that people who ate regularly in the dining hall were less likely to waste food, which further supports this idea that people who were familiar with the food were less likely to waste. Finally, on the bottom row, we had an idea that waste might be caused by variety seeking, that people took a bunch of different foods because they weren't really sure what they wanted. And taking more items was associated with taking more food, and more food was associated with more waste. But we don't really have good evidence about this idea specifically, in part because of the way that we ended up having to code this. Some people took lots of items by identifying each ingredient as a salad as different items, whereas other people took lots of items by taking more individual servings of different items. And so there's more work to be done here in terms of understanding this piece. But I will add that when you combine this with the top row about uncertainty, there's another interesting outcome, which is that people are slightly more likely to waste an item about which they are uncertain and when it was served by someone else. So this suggests that they take some unfamiliar things to try them, and when they can only take a full portion, there's a good chance it might be wasted because they don't know if they would like it. So that brings us to sort of our recommendations, things to do with it. No, you're right. So thinking about, these are the two key recommendations that we've been making about this. So really around boosting confidence in people's food choices in order to help reduce waste. So reducing portion size, not sort of to make them take smaller portions, but to enable people to try new things. So one of the issues that we run into a lot is that people don't know whether they're going to like something. And if they have to take a whole portion, there's a good chance that that could end up with waste. So finding ways to let them take smaller portions of new items would be helpful. And also just giving them the chance to try things multiple times. So familiarity, we all like things that are familiar. So can we think about giving people ways to become familiar with items, to become comfortable with the idea of trying it? So this paper is published, and we're now doing our best to publicize this research through a variety of channels. So I happen to be lucky. We have two great PR offices here at Rice, both at the university and at the business school. And they're putting out these articles and releases about the research. And we're happy to talk about it far and wide. So if this is something that interests you and you want to think more about how to implement it or additional tests that we might try, please let me know. As I mentioned, this was designed initially as exploratory research. So we really do believe that there's more we could learn. And this is a great opportunity for further collaboration. The one other piece that I would add is if you're interested in learning more about the actual process that we used for this research, so the photographs and how we coded those photographs and used that to analyze waste. It ended up being a little bit labor intensive, but we, I think, came up with a fairly good process for that. And I'm happy to talk more about that for anyone who's interested. So you can shoot me a message if it doesn't come up here as well. I think that's the end of mine, right?
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Nell. And thank you both, Peggy and Nell, for your amazing presentations. Please share also the word on this research with your contacts. We have developed a social media guide that you can find using the short URL bit.ly/reduce waste social media. So if you type that on your browser, you will find written material that you can use. And so we have, as you can see, we have so many projects in the pipeline. So the next steps for the MCURC Research Working Group is really for dining directors to look out at your emails for the survey on the resilience of the university food systems. For those of you who are interested in participating in the labeling study, we are doing a pilot in the spring, hopefully, depending on the speed of which we have the results on the pre-test on the labels. But we would like to do a multi-site study in the fall. And if you are interested in participating, just reach out to Peggy and I. I think what was the most exciting about that research that Nell just presented was that we have plenty of applications in the dining hall, especially with tasting tables, as we would love to be able to research the impact of sampling dishes on actual consumption and waste of certain plant-based or plant-forward dishes. So now we are open to questions.
Yes, well, thank you all so much. That's just super rich, and would love to hear from anyone in the audience about questions you have about the research pipeline, how you can get involved, the upcoming studies, and spreading the word on some of this. I just dropped into the chat our first piece of media coverage, very exciting, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and we hope it'll snowball from there. Thank you, Rochelle, for the applause. You can either drop your question into the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask it verbally. So I'll start. Don't all jump at once. So Ghislaine, can you talk a little bit about the, one of the things that we always do is translate these findings, right, into operational strategy toolkits. So what can people expect from here and in terms of the forthcoming resources?
So I'm very glad you asked the question, because one of the things that we've been doing with Peggy is work closely with our education working group to see how we can effectively translate all of these publications into toolkits or ideas or things that are easily used by operators. So for example, we are right now working on the toolkit for the Faith in Fat study, so that we can educate our students on the different roles of fat and how important it is, not only for health, but also to make you eat veggies, because there is nothing worse than steamed Brussels sprouts without any fat in it, right? We all need a little bit of olive oil to make it good. And so on all of these research, our goal is to develop toolkits in partnership with the education working group, so that we can either have our students involved in our education campaigns or operators, as we've seen for the olive oil. The report will be full of recipes and tips to understand what makes a good olive oil, what makes a good sauce, and what are the tangible use of it in our operations.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Shifting to the olive oil study, we do have Greg on the line. I don't know, Greg, if you had anything you wanted to add. I mean, really what's stunning to me, and I think Ghislaine spoke to this, that's the highest number of participating institutions we've ever had at 16. And it's just so great to see this real culinary collaboration happening there with the Executive Chefs Committee. So I also really want to thank the executive chefs who participated and our leaders, our fearless leaders, Akeisha and Matt. It's amazing to see that. And so, maybe if Greg, if you want to add kind of a little bit of where this is heading as well.
Yeah, no, unfortunately I came in halfway through that because I had another commitment. But the genesis of the project was there's widespread familiarity with the Mediterranean diet in the United States, but sometimes I think of it as sort of a mile wide and an inch deep, and there's a lot that people don't know, and the whole area of sauce making is one of them. And people know some of the more common sauces, but there's a whole world of sort of vegetarian or vegan or in some cases either of those two, I guess, sauces from North Africa to the Middle East to Southern Europe that people just don't know. And so this is a way to sort of take one corner of something that is a larger topic and really drill into that in greater depth. And it also sort of speaks to how to popularize something that is a perfectly good model for healthy, sustainable eating, but is less well known. There's a lot of great culinary traditions and examples of healthy, sustainable cooking around the world that are just less well known for whatever reason. And so this is an angle on sort of how do you identify sort of potential candidates and how do you narrow it down, and then I think that the interesting follow-up study would be, to what extent there are some concrete findings here in terms of consensus on what has the greatest potential. What can we do a couple years out in terms of where these things are getting traction?
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect, Greg. Thank you. We behind the scenes, when this project first came forward, we were kind of joking, right, about taking bets. Like my money was on Muhammara, and there's these other shug and so forth. And it is fun to kind of think of like what some of these sauces and dishes have really just got such prevalence in American products and food, menus all the way down to fast food, right? Pesto, something like that. And which are going to be those next ubiquitous dishes. It also reminds me of the Data Central menu adoption curve, right? Like most of the ones being tested right now are really at that early phase, and what will kind of be the ones that become universal and household items. So it's pretty phenomenal for us to be part of that, I think, in really shaping potentially, American food culture in that way. So it's really, really exciting. So we've got just a couple more minutes. Any questions for Dr. Nell Putnam-Farr on the food and climate labeling study? I saw Danny said, hey, this is exactly what we need. I don't know if you have further comments on that, Danny.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I would ask now if their team had looked into, we're doing something here at UNT where we've opened a new dining hall and we're running it with very standard digital menus that people are actually perceiving and looking at it from a different experience of a more traditional dining hall or cafeteria, but looking at it from a more of a restaurant concept and what those perceptions do as we take a look at moving more plant forward recipes together by creating this kind of a restaurant perspective, which is what our culture and our communities are finding more of as the norm, I guess.
So just on that quickly, and I think it's a really interesting point because we know that people choose differently when they choose from a distance versus when the food is right in front of them. And so I think what we're doing online as the pre-test might mimic that kind of menu choice a little more closely. And part of the question will be, do we see the same effect when people are choosing in a dining hall when this label is right next to the food? It's really hard to turn down that hamburger in favor of something else when you can smell it, things like that. So we're sort of taking out all of those things to start. The image of the appearance of the food, the smell of the food, things like that, and trying to limit it to really just the effect of this carbon label. But I think that the more we can do to get people to make those choices in sort of a cold mindset, as opposed to a warm mindset, the more that helps them make decisions that fit with their goals and the things that are important to them, as opposed to just hunger that they're focusing on in the moment of choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that great explanation. I've got a question here from Juliet at UC Berkeley, who has a really interesting question regarding the reason students waste food. What about the issue of quote unquote over familiarity with dishes? Our dining hall has a regular cycle menu that I think students start to find very repetitive as the semester progresses. I'm sure many people can relate. How can we combat this reason for food waste while still making it manageable for dining hall staff and chefs to plan the menus each semester? Ghislaine, you said you wanted to jump in there?
Yes, because we've studied food waste extensively at Stanford, and I think the COVID model has changed things drastically in terms of food waste. Especially like the research that Nell has spearheaded was done in a pre-COVID era where students were serving themselves in all you care to eat environment. And so they decided the portion size that they chose. Whereas in this current environment, in most of our universities, we are in to-go containers. So we choose for them. And from what I've seen at Stanford, the amount of food waste has transferred from pre-consumer to post-consumer. And before, in all you care to eat environment, we had to overproduce because we wanted all our students to have the same amount of choice at the beginning of the service and at the end of the service. Whereas now, we just need to have one box of each of the items for the last student that comes in the dining halls. And that makes a huge difference. However, we are not able to see the amount of food that is wasted from our students. And this is a challenge that we have identified. And I think the research model that Nell developed with the pictures before and after the dishes will be of help if we want to conduct this kind of study to understand what happens to the food. After that, for the menu fatigue, we call it the over-familiarity of dishes. This is something that I feel is pretty well known by our chefs. They know that, the first month in September, students are excited, they try everything and they go in the dining halls pretty often. After a few months, you can see that the attendance reduces and students are tired. But I think given what we've seen at Stanford, being able to control pre-consumer waste and overproduction will have the major impact on food waste.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add, I think what happens sometimes is that when people are familiar with a dish and bored with it, they don't take it. And so you're perhaps seeing less of that waste on their plates and more of it in terms of them choosing not to serve themselves the dish. And that's part of, I think, the issue with that overfamiliarity. So it wasn't something that we saw here because they probably weren't taking as much of those dishes. The one other thing that I would add is we did see a lot of comments from people that had to do with things like, asking why this was left on their plate. Well, I wanted the fruit and this was in the fruit salad and I couldn't avoid it. And so there's some things like that when things are packaged together, people don't necessarily want the things that go together. And so allowing them to do a little bit more mixing and matching might help in that sense as well. And that goes to we don't know when the meal is prepackaged, are they eating the side? Are they throwing that away? That's one of those challenges when you have those things that are sort of given to them as a package item.
Right, the visibility question from the entire cycle is quite interesting. So that's a great question, Juliet. Thank you so much. And clearly, it's sort of a COVID issue in particular, and many folks I know are just eager to get back to the dining operations that had designed out so much waste from the very beginning, and that's the further upstream, that's obviously going to be the best outcome possible. So we know many of you are invested in those efforts. Really want to thank everyone for joining us today. Excellent questions, fantastic presentations. Peggy, Ghislaine, Nell, so appreciate all of your leadership and just the incredible collective contributions to all of these studies in all types of roles. And it's just so inspiring. So thank you so much. And lots more ahead. So please do keep an eye out for your email. Keep calm and check your email, as Ghislaine said. And a really exciting kind of part 2 from Mei Wang and Chris Basso on resilience of the university food system, especially relevant to this food waste conversation and all that COVID has brought. So we wish you good health and a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week, and we'll be hopefully seeing you all soon. Take care, everyone.